So let's talk about where I was in the Peace Corps, the Sistan Basin, and I've got a slideshow and some photos from my album to show you. So you can see here on this 1930s globe, you can see right there on the Afghan border, lots of lakes. You can see it here. And this is the approach to from the south. You can see these typical farmhouses, and this is the same sort of style that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Here's some scenes. This is when you come into Zabul. This would be the main street into town. These are some old photos that I have. There's the bazaar entrance. You'll see mostly in those days be mostly men. These are Sistani. This is typical. They had these long scarves because the dust storms could come up at any time. More scenes of the bazaar. During the early part of the 20th century, the British and the Russians were very concerned with controlling parts of this part of Asia, so they each in Zabul each had an embassy. This is, I think, the British one is abandoned at the time. This one might have been I think the Russian. You can see some more scenes. This is where this is the street where I lived. This is the street where I lived. Most of the villages in Iran, certainly this one, had an open irrigation waterway, or they called them a jube. We might have called them just a sewer. This was a system of bringing water from some highlands down to the villages, and it would run through the villages. Let's look at this slideshow that I prepared. So here's the river that created these lakes, these seasonal lakes, was the Helmand, that it came out of the melted snows of the Hindu Kush in eastern Afghanistan. There you can see these lakes. See if I can operate this. Here's a little closer low. So it was a endormic basin. The water never reached the sea. Dried up seasonally. Here you can see one of the pictures of what it looked like with the western hills, and on the other side of those hills was the Lut Desert, one of the hottest, driest places. But on the eastern side were these marshes where people were fishermen, and they would gather reeds for their building. But the area was basically on all sides deserts, and the winds would come from the north, and they would bring these incredible windstorms. Here's this border area which shows a satellite view of the dust. It was phenomenal. So he used to call it the wind of 120 days. Fierce, consistent summer wind, but it could kick up any time of the year, really. Sometimes over 100 miles per hour. And it caused all sorts of damage, irritation. And once the river system, the Helmand, basically stopped reaching, for various reasons, the Persian side in the 2000s. This is my city where I spent a year. Zabul was named the world's most polluted city in, what was that, 2026? A terrible. It was, and look at this, young girls in Zabul have to get married at 14 because there's not much economic hope for them. But it wasn't always that way. 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, it was one of the most important Bronze Age cities in the world, a significant place and you can see the excavation there was done, and there's a small museum there now, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And these are some of the things that they found there. First, earliest animation ever found. First example of an artificial eye surgery, oldest backgammon set. And this is Maurizio Tozzi. He was the Italian archaeologist who was responsible for the early excavation of what was called then the Burnt City, or Sari-Shokte. And here he is with me and my friend Ahmad and Eric Tunis, the guy I live with on the right, American. So here's what I wrote about him. Maurizio Tozzi, a big man with a booming voice, charismatic, and internationally respected archaeologist, was on a mission to explain the beginning of civilization, no less. There he is with his entourage. He was a friend who generously included Eric and me in his project. Maurizio first burst into my life, literally, when he trailed by his fellow Italian archaeologists, team members, threw open our compound gates, stepped inside our garden, and yelled, "What's for lunch?" The Italian team had just arrived for another year of excavating the nearby Bronze Age site known as the Burnt City. From 67 to 78, Tozzi led the Istituto Italiano per Africa and Orient, I guess the Middle East, with some joint custody with Iran. Eric and Maurizio's friendship began the previous year. I greeted him Italian, which I learned living in Florence my junior year in college, and I got a big hug in return. The Italians couldn't stay long, as they had just had time to round up their Sistani crew, and here's a picture of them out getting their Sistani crews, who they worked with every year at the site. Maurizio was a pioneer in archaeology. He was the first person to use GPS systems, GIS. He was the first person to integrate all sorts of interdisciplinary studies and the study of literature and folklore and all sorts of things, anthropology, to explore and explain ancient civilizations. This is an AI image. He included me and Eric in the dig. This is an example of what the dig would have looked like back then. One of the significant things that came out of that was the first animation. You can see this bowl. See that? And there's a goat. And if you turn the bowl around, the goat starts to move and jump up and try to eat the branches. And this is definitely 55,002-year-old ceramic bowl. World's first example of animation. Here's an example of, they found this body of a female with an artificial eye. This is a reconstruction of what she would look like. And the world's first board game, an early version of backgammon was also found there, among many other things. So this is a view when the river was still flowing. You can see all these farmlands, and you see the connected lakes that were recreated by the river, flowing seasonally, and then they would dry up and then they would reconstitute. We had the good fortune to be some of the last people, certainly the last Americans, to be able to ride on reed boats up through the marshes to a basalt mountain, which had some important archaeological sites. And here you can see some of the Peace Corps volunteers from nearby, the town about 100 miles south of Zion, and they came up to take this excursion with us. There's Bob Marr, there's me, there's Eric Tunis. Look at this. This is such a bygone era for sure. There we are again. And this was the lake that we were crossing, and we're on our way to Mount Khwaja, considered a very important archaeological site. On the South Promontory, there are ruins of a citadel known as this, with its remains, there was a Zoroastrian fire temple from pre-Islamic Iran. And here's a sort of a modern view of going through the complex to get to the fort. And here's showing us, we actually did go through, some of these photos are really in bad shape, but there we are on that excursion. It is believed that Zoroastrian tradition holds that the Zoroaster's seed was preserved in the lake, and it is said that 99,000 guardian spirits of the just are appointed to protect the seed from being destroyed by demons. And according to legend, when the final renovation of the world is near, maidens will enter the lake, bathe in it, become pregnant, and these virgins will give birth to these saviors of humankind, who will eventually appear at the end of each of the final 3 millennia. And here's one of them. It's a novel written about one of them and his journey to save. These were messiahs, and the Zoroastrian religion, which is way older than the Christianity. The Bible took a lot of their early ideas of hell and heaven and the redemption and the Messiah coming and defeating the good and or honoring, protecting the good and defeating the evil. Also in this part of the world, with these severe winds and these dust storms, this is a much studied now system in which the sides of these buildings, these adobe, first of all, they're built with adobe bricks, so they're very thick, and they would definitely hold they're cool, just like we have in the Southwest here. They would hold the temperatures would be very stable inside, warm or cold, and to combat the winds, or to have the winds support they would build these networks, these little structures of all sorts of reeds and other material, and they would run water through it. The water would dampen the structure, and the winds would blow through it. You can see it there, and the cool air would move through the building from room to room, and the hot air would be trapped at the top and would escape in these towers that were connected. You can see them here. And on my house, the house compound we lived in, there it is. Each room had this dome, and each room had this escape vent at the top. Now this is, in this area, this is the way it was done. The winds were strongest at the ground, so that's why they had this system built. And there would be a hole in the wall where the air would funnel through. But these big networks were built in the side. And the rest of Iran, which is super dry, also, they had a system in which these towers caught the wind, and then they funneled down and then pushed out the hot air on the other tower, so you can see that. And we actually had that system too, because in certain times of the year, we had these towers the wind would flow through the house and exit through various doors or through that one vent hole on the side. So, very significant, interesting part of the world that I got to experience. I mentioned earlier, Maurizio and his team Italian archaeologists came and used to have some lunch with us sometimes, and then we would have lunch out at the dig. You can see Maurizio there in the top next to top right. There he is, and there's my friend Ahmad, and there's Eric, the American, who I lived with. Here's my friend Khosrow, who is a Kurd who was living out there with the Literacy Corps. Here's that photo. Ahmad, my friend, also in the Literacy Corps officer. Here's Meredith, by the way. She made it out to the dig when our second year. Here's Khosrow in conversation with Maurizio. Here they are out rounding up their Sistani workers. Here's a site. Here's Hosro out there. Some of these Sistani laborers or archaeologist team members learned to speak Italian, and some of them learned to cook Italian. So at the dig, at noon came around, it was time to stop, and they would go into a tent. There would be a full Italian meal, wine and everything, cheese. All of this food came in for the Italians on a big lockers that were sent from Italy, and came directly to this port so that they could still, I mean, they were Italians. Didn't matter where they were. They were there to do important work, but also carry on their Italian lifestyle as best they could. So my job as a Peace Corps volunteer was to teach English as a second language at one of the Zabul's local high schools. These pictures are all AI, depicting scenes that I experienced. After my school day was over, I would ride my bike past an abattoir, a slaughterhouse, and frequently at the end of the day there would be all these freshly killed camel and goat skins that they would lay out on the street, and people like me, my bike or cars would go, and it was helping I guess, cure the hides. So that was, whoops. And on this one day, early on, I left school and went to the local bathhouse to get cleaned up because I was going to be meeting for the first time an Iranian woman, a wealthy Iranian woman who lived there, who wanted to have English conversation. So I went in, got bathed, came out, and there was a dust storm. So it kind of defeated the whole purpose of going to get cleaned up. Nevertheless, oops, where am I going? It was rumored, by the way, that the woman that I was going to meet and her family were, among other things, they were wealthy landlords of the area. Among other things, it was always hinted that they were responsible or helped bring smuggled opium and other drugs into the country, and they would run them at night through the desert, and they would meet on a highway to the west where the loads would be loaded on, the camels would be taken back, and the whole process would be started over. But I didn't know anything about. There were rumors that this woman, for instance, here's another AI picture. She did meet me, and it was surprising. Under her veil or her she had strapped on a Western style holster and gun, 6-shooter, which she didn't really hide. I didn't discuss it with her, but she was a fan of Western movies, U.S. cowboy Western movies. She had these posters around, and we sat. She made me feel comfortable. We had Pepsi and I don't know, salsa and chips. I don't know where she got all that, but she was a wealthy person in the community, and all she wanted to do was talk about the Wild West and all that. She kind of disappointed me because I was an Easterner. I didn't know much about it. So there's another view, a younger woman. This is another AI creation. So I noticed that the sandstorm had not ceased. It was still really heavy, and so I had this vision that at the end of our conversation, she would have one of her servants load my bike on the Land Rover and take me home, and maybe give me a bunch of pistachios and some wine and bread. This is what I was hoping that would happen. Instead, they gave me some flatbread, which I strapped on the back of my bike and rode back off to my house. Her compound was a little out of town, and some wild dogs came down and were chasing me, and I was absolutely frightened and speeding up, and they were nipping at my heels. And then I realized they wanted the flatbread, so I pushed the flatbread off, and they fell to snarling and eating it. My vision of it was the Peace Corps kept saying, in that Peach Corner manual, if you're bitten by a wild dog, please, get the head of the dog and bring it to the nearest clinic to be tested for rabies. That's what was going through my mind as this was happening. This is one of the first things that I write about in the book. That evening, though, back in the garden, this is another AI vision of my garden. My garden in the compound where we lived was a little less grand than this, but it did have a fountain in the middle and had date palms and roses and all that. And there I was. The dust had stopped, the air had cleared, and I can't believe it, but there was a nightingale in one of the branches singing, and the nightingale is a symbol of hope, and it was a wonderful experience. And all of that really happened. Let's see if I can get this stopped. As I mentioned, I was responsible for teaching at a boys' high school on the edge of town. Many of these boys were kind of tribal boys that lived out in the villages, and I basically created my own system of very active engagement. It became something that was popular later, but I kind of invented it for myself, in which I would have one side of the room boys doing something like stand up, and then the boys on the other side would say, "What are they doing?" "We're standing up." And then, raise your hands, sit down, turn around. "What are you doing?" "Turning around." So it was a very physical, active learning that I was not taught in the Peace Corps training, but that I just developed out of, wanting to have something active and fun. Active and fun in the faculty room for those Iranian teachers was laughing at how I didn't have callous fingers, and the style of drinking tea was in little glasses, and I was always burning my fingers. These guys thought it was hilarious because I learned later that the reason that they have tea in glasses was if it's too hot and burns your fingers, then it's too hot to drink, and they wanted to be able to see the color of the tea, which is important. So in a teacup or something, you don't necessarily see it. So it had a lot of reasons. The Persians have a long history of tea drinking, and I got to experience that in the faculty. So early on, my teaching, boys that came in late because they had to walk from the villages and they weren't always well dressed, and sometimes they didn't have very good shoes. If they arrived late, there was a head boy in the class who would go tell a custodian who roamed around the back in the schoolyard. We were out in a kind of an adobe building separate from the rest of the high school. And this guy would come in, and the boys who arrived late would hold out their hands, and he would whack them on their hands with a fan belt, or sometimes some sort of a stick. And these boys were lost for the whole rest of the lesson because they would sit in the back whimpering and their hands hurt. Of course, if it was winter, their hands were all cold already. So this was a self-defeating exercise. So I stopped it. I got the head boy, gave him other things to do, and I prevented this from happening. Fast forward to a year or so later, I was teaching in a high school in Long Island, and this class had a bunch of teachers. They were kind of an unruly group of kids, and nobody could take care of them. So I was hired. The principal said, "Look, if you survived teaching Iran, you can handle this class." So the first day, a bunch of kids arrived late, and they were just hanging around out in the hallway. Finally, they came in, and I said, "You know what happened to people who arrived late in my old school?" "No, what?" "They got beaten on their hands." And this was pretty shocking and surprising. So the kids were saying, "Well, why did you do that? Why would you beat kids up?" And I said, "Well, look, if we do the lessons, finish our lessons, pay attention, and we'll get through. I'll tell you why." And that's what happened. And the kids paid attention. And then the next class came in and said, "Why did you beat?" The kids said in the previous class said in your old school you used to beat kids up. And I said, "Well, there's a story to that. Look, come on, let's do the lesson. And if you if we get finished early, I'll tell you about it. I did this all year. I did this for a year and a half, telling stories about Iran. The kids love them, and here's some examples of the stories. So I told them about dust storms. I told them about being attacked by wild dogs, riding across skins of camels. I told them about how Iranians eat on the floor or sometimes over water picnics. I told them about an experience I had having to eat a sheep's eye and those times in the peaceful gardens on my garden. We talked about beautiful art cities like Isfahan and meeting women in the Gulf area who wore masks, these kind of severe masks. They're selling fish, and those smuggled camel caravans carrying smuggled loads at night. I told them about eating melons and drinking tea on long bus rides in the middle of nowhere, and how the danger of riding these buses, because lots of accidents, and these bus drivers were bored and they would race each other. Sometimes the buses were loaded with goats and sheep. And so these are the stories I told. So, for instance, I would also do role playing. So if the kids all got finished their work for the week and were, had productive, I had them all role play riding an Iranian bus, and I had bags of pistachios to give out to them. And, they were, because I said, Iranians are always eating pistachios wherever they are. And it was interesting because when these kids all started to put the shells back in the bag, I said, no, you don't put the shells back in the bag, you just drop them on the floor. That's the Iranian, Iranian. So, and at the end of school, after the year and a half that I taught there, classes were dismissed. I was just finishing up. I was going to move on to another job. This girl appeared in the doorway, and she said, "Mr. Hughes, I know I deserved that you failed me. I know I didn't do well on the tests. I didn't participate in class. I didn't do the assignments." She said, all I could do, the only reason I actually even came to class was I just wanted to hear your stories. I just wanted to dream that I one day could go to far off places like that and have those experiences. I just wanted to let you know. And with that, she turned around and went out. I didn't remember her name. I was so flabbergasted I didn't get up and go follow her to talk about it, but I never forgot her and her experience. And what the lesson she taught me was always pay attention to the kids who are quiet in the back of the room or whatever, and try to get their story and figure them out and get them engaged. Bringing Iran back was part of the Peace Corps experience, letting Americans know about it. And I always did that with my teaching. Here's some of my elementary school students. We created this village, Iranian village, and they got to role play various positions in the village. Sometimes I would mess up when they were out at recess. I would break up some of these things that they'd created, and they'd say, "Oh, an earthquake had happened or a flood," and we would start over again. And I told them, my students, I taught them all backgammon, how to play backgammon. I told them that I learned how to play in my garden with Iranians, and that the dig where I was on, the archaeological dig, was the site where the first backgammon set was played. I'm a little shaky here. And another school I was teaching, there was a bunch of Iranian kids, and we came up with this idea of sharing their culture a little bit with the rest of the students. And so we had this table set up. This is the Nimruz table of spring, celebrating spring. And this was before the other kids came in to learn, some of the parents, so the kids would be able to introduce their customs and their tradition.